Check it out! It's the Laugh to Learn podcast! What is going on, everyone? Welcome to the Laugh to Learn podcast, your weekly source for a bit of a comedic spin on all the goings-on in the world. My name is Jacob Paveo, and I come to you from the Great White North every single Tuesday evening, Eastern Standard Time, fresh for download to listen to at work, Wednesday morning for everyone, the entire world around. As always, thank you so much for listening. This podcast comes to you completely ad-free, and all that I ask is for you to subscribe on any podcasting platform or over on YouTube, and tell your friends about me either in person or with a share over on social media. And that's what I'm really asking for this week is after you finish listening to the episode, if you could please go and share it with someone or with your people over on social media. And if you have a second, also give us a 5-star rating over on Apple Podcast, because it is a great help to us. It helps us show up higher in search engines and stuff. And yeah, that would be great help. This was a very slow news week. I said last week that I'm not going to talk about the Trump impeachment scandal, or it's not really a scandal, he's being impeached. But I'm planning a longer episode that I've already started working on for that. But basically that's all that's being covered in the news right now, so I did my best to pull out some stories I thought would be interesting. I hope last week that people found that episode interesting about the Canadian and American governments sending banking information to one another that in some cases actually belongs to their own citizens. So if you haven't checked that out yet, go listen to it. That was a short episode, so I'm assuming this one's going to be too. But who knows? I always say that, and basically I've had 2 episodes that actually ended up like less than 45 minutes. So it is what it is. But I would assume this week is going to come up short. Honestly, like I said, there just isn't that much going on in the news right now because it's basically everyone's still talking about Hong Kong, which is horrible. I might do a catch-up episode coming up on that. Unfortunately, because of the language barrier, it is still very difficult to get legitimate information out of Hong Kong. So there's a few journalists that I follow who are English-speaking journalists, but, you're not getting the whole story. So I really was hoping that I'd be able to do a catch-up episode, but it's very difficult to find English information on it. And, you can't rely on something like Google Translate, especially to talk about a story like as big as the Hong Kong riots. I already mentioned everything else going on with Trump that's taking up the news cycle here. Another huge story in Canada this week. Most listeners are either Canadian or American, so you might know who Don Cherry is, got fired. He said something that people didn't like. I don't really want to talk about it because it's, first of all, it's a very Canadian-centric story, and I think people can understand if I would talk about Canadian politics and maybe you're an American or an Australian or South African or, I don't know, Japanese or something like that, you can listen to a conversation about Canadian politics or any foreign country, and if you're interested in politics, it's going to be interesting to you. The problem is that for me to sit here and talk about Don Cherry for 10 or 15 minutes even, he's just a Canadian guy, and even in Canada, he's irrelevant to a lot of people. It's even like, it's not even a hockey story. It's a hockey analyst. So there's a lot of people who love hockey that don't like Don Cherry and wouldn't want to hear me talk about it. So, yeah, I'm just not going to touch it with a 10-foot pole. he got a new TV show. For those who are happy to hear that, that's fantastic. And I'm just going to leave it at that. So yeah, that's basically it. The main news stories in the Canadian news cycle, at least right now, are Hong Kong is kind of number 2, number 1 is Trump, and number 3 seems to be Don Cherry right now. And all 3 of those things I either plan on talking about in the future or don't want to talk about right now. So, or ever really, for the Don Cherry thing. So I've compiled as much as I could. I'm hoping that I can make this episode interesting for you guys. As I said, I'm at the end of last week's episode. I am just about done another CPA course, so it finishes in next Saturday, I think I'm done. So I'm taking the winter off, so I'm going to take time to get back to a lot more joke writing and stuff. I'm going to have a lot more time on my hands. So, well, I mean, I say that, but I don't have much time on my hands anyways. But I'm planning on getting a lot heavier into writing for the podcast and getting those weird news stories that I love talking about, but they take a couple hours every week to find. So now this will open up about a day or two extra for me, or a night or two, I should say, every week that I can work on it. So that's really exciting. And yeah, for this week, we're going to be talking a little bit about some Indigenous rights, which is something I've never really talked about. So I'm kind of excited to bring that up. I'm going to give an update on the Democratic Convention, but first we're going to talk a little bit about some controversy, a controversy, as the British might say, even though that's also English, so we would say it like that too, in the Canadian military. So yeah, without any further ado, let's get to it. The big headline yesterday splattered across international news websites read, or at least the one on Huffington Post, as written by the Canadian press, read, quote, "Military members linked to hate groups received warnings but were allowed to stay," end quote. So once again, this is from the Canadian press out of Ottawa. And in their article, they said, quote, "The Department of National Defense says 16 military members that a report last year linked to hateful actions or groups have been warned, disciplined, or ordered to take counseling, but all are allowed to remain in uniform." National Defense had previously reported that 7 of the 36 members identified through the 2018 Military Intelligence Report on White Supremacy and hate groups in the ranks were no longer in the Canadian Armed Forces. The department had been unable to provide any further information on the others until now. This sparked questions and criticism from anti-hate advocates over whether military officials were taking the issue seriously enough. As for the remaining 13 cases, National Defense would only say some of them are ongoing. This update comes as new documents obtained by the Canadian press through an access of information request revealed military officials initially wanted to charge an officer cadet and kick him out of the forces for associating with the far-right Proud Boys group. Military prosecutors eventually said there was no reasonable prospect of convicting the cadet because it would violate his charter rights, while senior officers decided to let him stay after he told them that he was no longer a part of the Proud Boys. And once again, that's from the Canadian press on November 18th. And there's no specific journalist named, which if they were, I always like to shout them out, but they were not. So, this, as I mentioned, came out yesterday. The news wasn't very big when it first happened, but it's been picking up steam, I think, just because of the time, really. That 36 members of the Canadian Armed Forces were investigated a little over a year ago is when the investigations began into whether or not they were parts of different organized hate groups, which is what the Canadian military called the groups that they were investigating. And now, as I said, 7 of these members, military personnel, have left the military, and they decided to close those cases. They're not actively pursuing them. They were not dismissed either. They left on their own. I mean, they may have been dismissed, but not for this reason. We're not given any reason as to why they had left, but either way, they're not serving in the military today. As for the extra 16, these have just came out that all of them have been investigated, and the investigations are closed. None will be leaving the military. And there are 13 members who either have ongoing investigations or the investigations have been closed, but they are not commenting specifically on any of those cases. So the big thing was that this all started with a military member being found to be a member of the Proud Boys. Now, I know a lot of people who listen to my podcast also listen to Joe Rogan's podcast. And the reason I know that is twofold. One, almost anyone who listens to podcasts listens to Joe Rogan. But two, I can also see my podcast statistics, and I could see that a lot of you are also subscribed to Joe Rogan's podcast, which is cool. But you would also know, if you listen to Joe Rogan enough, he talks about the Proud Boys a lot because the Proud Boys are a legitimate trolling group. Now, there is a sect of people that were part of this trolling group that then started kind of taking it, seriously and as an actual supremacist thing. But the founder of the Proud Boys was a comedian, like a legitimate comedian who goes around the country telling jokes. And he was making a joke in starting the Proud Boys. You can listen to the whole story on Rogan's podcast. The founder himself has told it, and Joe has told it multiple times. If you just search JRE Proud Boys, and I'm sure you'll find it. It's not like it's hidden or anything. Like, literally, he's a comedian. It would be like right now if I started calling all of my subscribers Laugh to Learners, and then a group of the Laugh to Learners went out there and decided that the Laugh to Learners are a white supremacy group. Like, that's what happened. This guy started a group. A bunch of his fans kind of followed him. It was funny. He was telling jokes, and it was all about male supremacy, but like as a joke, right? Like a comic anti-feminist. Some of you listening to this might not like that. However, it's fucking comedy. Like, you can read the initial posts and stuff that several governments, including my own and the American government, have said that those original posts were proof of white supremacy, which they most definitely are not. They are jokes. Like, they're memes, first of all, and they're jokes. So even if they're in bad taste, it's still a joke. And something like this, I've talked about this before, but intent really matters, right? It's just like Pepe the Frog, for those of you that remember. People misconstrued the idea of Pepe the Frog, and today those are the little frog memes, right? That's why we don't see Pepe anymore, because it's considered far right, and a supremacist icon, a supremacist logo, which it's just not, right? It's a meme. Like, someone was sitting in their basement and was like, they probably didn't even laugh out loud. They just typed LOL after they made a meme that they thought was funny and shared it. And, it's just the way the internet works, where people who don't like what they read, they don't like the joke or they don't get the joke, react a certain way. And then there's another group of people who like watching their reaction. And that's kind of what happened with the Proud Boys, because a whole bunch of people on the far left really didn't like the jokes the Proud Boys were making, and they all had this little Proud Boys logo on memes, and they had like forums and stuff like that. So essentially, a bunch of leftists got pissed off and started lashing out about it, and then people who were likely not even part of the Proud Boys, but just watching from a distance, liked the reaction that the Proud Boys group was getting from the left, so they just kind of latched onto that name, right? So, I mean, there's a chance that this military member was a part of the Proud Boys when they were, like, a trolling group. He's been in the military for at least 2 years, and the Proud Boys thing is, like, you're talking 3 or 4 years old. Like, if he was part of this Facebook group in high school, I mean, like, quite literally, he was probably part of, like, a joke group that he, posted memes in high school. And nothing to do with white supremacy, because he would have been fired had that been the case. Like, there's no question, right? So the Canadian military also has an estimated 64,000 active military personnel. 64,000. There is no doubt that some of those guys and girls are assholes. okay? When you get 64,000 of anyone, there's going to be some assholes. Probably fewer than the general population because statistically, what it takes to be in the military is a lot more. But you're still going to get some assholes who get through. And that's just going to happen, right? So the fact that there's 36 people in total being looked into, and 16 of those 36 were found to be fine. Another 7 have already left of their own will. They probably just, their time in the military was up and they were done their active duty, so they left. So there's 13 more people being investigated. I mean, let's say all 36 were white supremacists. Those are fucking fantastic odds. Like, that's actually far better than I bet you would get out of 64,000 random people. You would most definitely get a whole bunch of white supremacists in that group if you were to take 64,000 random people from across the country. Okay? So it's not a problem. It's like a lot of people are really reacting to this, and it's kind of good that this is being buried by the Don Cherry story, to be honest with you, because it was definitely below the Don Cherry story on the main page of everything. I found it on Huffington Post, actually, not even like yesterday. I didn't even see it on the CBC website till I went looking for it. It's on Canadian Press. It's on their website because they're the ones who kind of broke the story. But it's crazy that they're all covering it, but it's like way down below. And I think that's a good thing, and I'll get to that in a little bit. But, it's really not a story. Like, you found that 30 people might be racist out of 64,000. It's pretty fucking good. And when it comes down to it, it looks like they actually weren't racist. But this is actually where I need to reach out to you, the listener, my listener, to your better judgment. And I'm speaking to anyone out there who, just basically anyone out there. If you really think about it, right, most of us don't serve in the military, any military. Doesn't matter what country you live in right now. And I know that because that's how statistics work, because statistically, more people don't serve in militaries than do. So statistically speaking, most of you don't work in the military. And my audience is probably not typically a military one based on the countries that it's in. They're typically smaller standing militaries in those countries, other than the U.S., but most of my audience is, of course, Canadian, where, as I already mentioned, we have 64,000 active military personnel, and likely not all of them are listening to this podcast. So it is important that we all stop and think about, as citizens, right? Not as, like, I'm not speaking to any military personnel, but just as a citizen, to think about what a news cycle like this does to the other tens of thousands who are serving in our military today, right? There's a major gun problem in Toronto right now. But you don't need to run and duck for cover every time a Torontonian approaches you, right? Save that action for when Cosby gets released from prison. That's when you need to run and duck for cover, okay? Now, I understand this is a news story because some military personnel were caught believing something that is counter to the generally accepted belief structure of our nation. And they were caught with a past that included at least somewhat of an electronic presence on forums and in Facebook groups where disgusting hatred was, at least recently, openly shared. And that's wrong. But it's also their right. Like, we can't start picking and choosing who's going to serve in our military based on something like this. Like, there literally is no evidence that being a part of a Facebook group or even actively posting in a Facebook group necessarily aligns you with everything about it. There's a chance that a lot of these people were part of groups that they knew nothing about what these groups did. Because, like, how many Facebook groups did you join in high school? I was in literally as many as you can be. I got a warning being like, you've joined too many Facebook groups, you have to leave some. Quite literally, that's not a joke. So, I'm certain that some of the groups that I was in, and probably commented, like something would pop up and I'd like comment on it or post in it or something, but I didn't know what they actually did. So, like, we have to remember that the internet is not a group of people like sitting in a cafeteria that you choose to go and sit with every day for lunch, and you know everything about the 5 people at the table. Like, you're talking about like 100,000 people who have crazy different beliefs, and you might have just been thrown in there. So we do have to really remember that, and that can't be the minimum to get into the military is you can't believe in certain things. Now, I do believe that we can't let someone into our military who is a white supremacist or a black supremacist or an Asian supremacist or whatever the hell, right? I completely agree. We can't let religious extremists from any religion into our military. I completely agree with that, because suddenly you have a belief system that becomes greater than your military task, right? So that suddenly becomes an issue, and it becomes a big issue. So I understand why we have to do stuff like that. But when we're starting to look at someone's Facebook groups and stuff like that, and it's just like, I mean, you do psych evaluations on people who are joining the military. Why is it that, like I'm sorry, but pretty fucking fast. I don't understand how you could get through boot camp as like a white supremacist. I actually don't. Do you know why? Because you have to take orders from black people. And I'm not saying like orders like get in line and march. Like, for anyone who knows anything about what you go through in basic training, it's fucked, like completely fucked. And you have someone of a different race, of different religions, like screaming in your face, shooting you with like rubber bullets and smacking you in the face with pieces of metal that simulate being knives, and fucking tasing you and doing all this crazy shit to you. People of different races and stuff like that. Like, as a supremacist, you're not going to be okay with that. It just doesn't make sense that you would get through not only the psych evaluation, but also just that basic training. It's just weird. It's strange, right? So, I truly believe that as a journalist, you have to be able to see that there is no there. This really shouldn't be a story, because no one who wrote it, no one who's passed it on, edited it, shared it, and certainly no one who's calling for their termination, of which there are plenty of those people, their termination from duty, none of them are set to give their life for this country or any other. So how dare you judge someone who is, in someone's... How dare you judge what's in someone's mind from when they were a teenager, especially? Because, like, these people had to be, like, high school age when this happened. I mean, what world are we living in where someone who's been in active duty for at least 2 years is being investigated now by the media because they joined a dumb trolling group on Facebook back in high school? How dare you think so highly of yourself? As mentioned in the article, the members who are still serving will be going through counseling, at least some of them, to better themselves. And I mean, that's the basic story. The Department of Defense found out 16 different personnel used to be in a now perceived racist Facebook group, which wasn't perceived as racist at the time. So now they have to take classes and counseling to better themselves, because there were no instances where they directly spoke about themselves holding those opinions. There are no instances within the military of them acting on any similar opinions. There's no story here. It's just an anti-military story that's now made international news. And this makes me so irritated with the left that I want to swing so far the other way, I wake up with an ear piercing and a tattoo of some guy named Chad's name on my left shoulder. Yeah, I had to jump through some hoops to get that joke out. Don't forget to subscribe and share the podcast with your friends and family. Tell them all about it, mention it at work, and make sure they know all about the incredible, valuable, lengthy list of content available ad-free every Tuesday. This is the 39th episode. There's a ton of stuff for people to go back and check out. Tell them to listen to your favorite episode. Like, pick an episode and be like, check this one out. If you were going to ask me, the Hong Kong episode, I really had fun doing, but it's like heavy content, so it might not be the best one to recommend. So I would recommend like, the Canadian one, after the election, the post-election results. Recommend that episode to people. That was a really fun one to do as well. I had a lot of people tell me that it was funny, which is a good thing. I think I mentioned this last week. It surprised me because I didn't think it was funny, but I had a few people tell me it really was, so sweet. As always, thank you all so much for the support. Send your friends, share the podcast. Tell them to listen to that elections results episode. Tell them to listen to this episode, all the episodes. They'll want to subscribe on whatever podcasting platform they choose because it's completely ad-free, so they might as well. I don't waste any of your time with ads. And feel free to reach out to me anytime using the contact page over at www.laughtolearnpodcast.com or on social media, which can be found in the description for this episode and all episodes on your podcast platform of choice. We had some breaking news this past week out of the Democratic National Convention in the States to see who's going to face off with Donald Trump. Now, this isn't like groundbreaking news or ground-shaking news. I guess it's a little groundbreaking. But Mayor Pete Buttigieg is leading in the Iowa polls. So Iowa is a big deal. It's very complicated, actually, and I'm not going to get into all of it because it's way too politically nerdy, but Iowa is one of the first place that anyone gets to vote in a primary. So it's one of the first states that goes because they don't all go on the same day. It happens over the course of about a week and a half or 2 weeks. So the momentum you get at the beginning can be a big deal because if people see, oh, you won on day one, then on day two, people in that state might be more willing to vote for you. So it is a big deal. But Iowa is also a caucus. So it's not like a public event where everyone gets to go out and vote. Only certain people in the Iowa Democratic Party get to vote, so it's very complicated. If you're interested, feel free to read about it. But as I said, I'm not getting into the difference between like a primary election and a caucus and blah blah blah. But yeah, so Mayor Pete, who of course is the mayor of Grand Bend, Indiana, I talked about him a lot at the beginning of all of these campaigns. He is polling number one in a state. And he's the first gay man to ever do that. So that's a big deal. I mean, the problem with Mayor Pete is he's not going to win, not because he's gay, but because he polls at 1% with black voters. And as a Democrat, you need black voters. It's just a fact. Black women typically elect Democratic candidates. So as a Democrat, if you win, it is because black women came out and voted. It's just the way that it is, and he just does horribly with black women now, and black men, just the African American community in general. Like I said, 1% he pulls at nationwide, so that's very bad. There is a chance that as people who are further down the list, Mayor Pete right now is in. I think he's in fourth place. So he's right after Biden, Sanders, and Elizabeth Warren. Elizabeth Warren's in second. And then you have Mayor Pete. And, you know, he's doing okay. But it's very significant that a gay man for the first time ever is polling top in a state, especially like we're not far from the Iowa caucus. It's just in, a matter of weeks now. So that's still really important. But to get on with our update, I think I'm going to probably do these like once a month. I'll do one more in December and one in January. And then in February when these elections really start, I'll get a lot heavier into it. But for now, Joe Biden's still number one. He didn't take any slips with all the attacks that have been made against him. And actually, a Fox News poll has him rated at 31% in a national poll. And the average polling position across all the accepted pollsters is about 25%, which is kind of weird that Fox has him so high. But it's a big deal because the last person to not win who was outside of first place at this point, so rather the last person to not win who was in first place at this point were Hillary Clinton and Rudy Giuliani. So they were both leading in 2008. And ultimately, of course, Clinton was beaten by Obama, and Rudy Giuliani was beaten by John McCain, and then Obama would beat John McCain in the general election later that year. It's kind of crazy, though, that, I mean, Hillary Clinton and Rudy Giuliani are two people we talk about a lot in politics right now. Of course, Rudy Giuliani is Trump's personal lawyer, who could be in hot water in the next little while, and we all know why Hillary Clinton is in the news. Mainly because Epstein didn't kill himself. Total media mentions are something that I was looking into because they are a really interesting way to view politics in 2019. And I think actually I want to really look into this the next time I get into a political episode, because it was so cool to read about this, but I don't understand enough about it to really dive deep, and I'd really like to. But it was interesting because Biden's in the lead here with more than 40,000 media mentions above all the other candidates. I think whoever was in second place, it was Bernie, I think, was in second place, and Warren in third for mentions. And this is on like TV, newsprint, radio. I guess they just electronically scan to hear how many times your name is mentioned, and they count it. So that was crazy. The really weird thing that I noticed was that no one is talking about Andrew Yang. He's one of the only candidates in like the top, I think he's like 7th or 8th, and he was in like 12th in media mentions. So no one in mainstream media is talking about him. However, he is all over social media, Instagram and Twitter. He does very well. He has more than 1,000 tweets more than any other candidate. I think Elizabeth Warren was in second, and she has like 1,100, and he's at like 2,400 tweets since the campaign started. So he is all over social media and killing it. I'm not an Andrew Yang fan. I mean, like, I'm not an American, so I won't be voting, but I would not be supporting Andrew Yang. That said, he's all over my social media. Like, tons of people that I know and tons of people that I follow are obsessed with the Yang Gang and those math hats, Make America Think Harder, which is a fucking awesome slogan. And yeah, he's doing very well on social media, but polling okay. I just found it very interesting that someone who is literally number one on social media rankings isn't even in the top 10 on the mainstream media rankings. And that makes me wonder what the future is going to look like, because Andrew Yang is young. He's like, I think he's like in his mid 40s. You have to be 45 to run for president. I wouldn't be surprised if he was like 46. He's probably in his 50s because they always look young. But, you know, he's very young running for office. I almost wonder if in a cycle or two, depending, like if a Democrat wins, then I'm assuming they'd run again. But the next time he has a chance to run for office, because of this social media base that no one else has, once no one's subscribed to cable, which if the next time that the Democrats have a chance to pick a new leader is in 8 years, right? Andrew Yang running in 8 years when there's no real, like no one's subscribed to cable anymore, right? No one's like, everyone's Disney Plus and Netflix and blah, blah, blah. And you're getting your news from social media and web sources. Someone like Yang, who has this massive following right now, like fucking huge. And I don't just mean in followers, because, like, yes, Warren and Sanders and Biden have way more followers than he does. But most of your followers aren't paying attention to you. It's his interactions. He himself responds to people constantly. He's always in selfies, always, always, always. honestly, I would not be I would be shocked if there was another person running for office right now who had taken more photos. And I think Elizabeth Warren talks about like, oh, I've taken this many photos. I do not think she's taken more than Andrew Yang. And I'm saying this like just off the top of my head based on what I've seen on my own feed. But I'm not a fan of his. I have never been to his website or anything. There's no reason for his content to be pushed to me. It's just that I have a ton of people I follow on Twitter and Instagram who fucking love him. So he might not be a big threat right now, but Andrew Yang is going to be a big threat down the road. And mark my words there, because he truly will be. The really interesting thing with Andrew Yang and the social media presence is that his communications don't come in likes and retweets. They come in responses. And he just talks back and forth with people in responses. And I think that might be the way of the future, especially with a company, because Andrew Yang has fewer likes and fewer retweets than, Sanders and Biden. The people with all these hundreds of millions of, or not hundreds, but tens of millions of followers. He has, a decent number of followers. I don't have the number in front of me. But he's not getting a shit ton of likes and retweets. He's getting conversation going. And if Instagram removes likes and Facebook removes likes and then Twitter ends up following suit because they see the other companies are making money, 8 years from now, someone like Sanders and Biden and Warren, I mean, it won't be Sanders, Biden, or Warren, because they'll all be, one of them will probably win right now and won't run again, and the other two will be too old to run. But people like that who have all these followers but no social media prowess, they can't get a conversation going, they just know how to get a one-line retweet or like, those people are going to be shit out of luck, because someone like Andrew Yang, who can get a conversation going online, gets people's attention 24 hours a day. That's going to be a very interesting thing to see in the future. And finally, BC First Nations have sued to have Alcan take down the Kenny Dam, and this is from Betsy Trumpener from CBC News. So, two BC First Nations suing one of the world's biggest mine companies over a northern river. They say that Rio Tinto Alcan, the company, should be forced to dismantle, and this dam was built 67 years ago. Now, the Syke-Oos and the Stellatan First Nations are both in court to press their lawsuit against Rio Tinto Alcan. They contend that this dam was built to generate hydropower and smelt aluminum at Alcan's Kitimat plant, and it reversed the river's course and diverted 70% of water flow for industrial use, leaving only 30% to flow for fishing, hunting, and natural reasons. The First Nations say it's caused more than a half-century of environmental degradation, harm to sturgeon and salmon, and damage to constitutionally protected Aboriginal rights. Quote, "I'm the fourth generation of my family who's been fighting for the rights on the river. We want it restored," said Syke-Oos band councillor Jasmine Thomas. The Nechako, the river itself, is a major tributary that flows into the Fraser River. Thomas said in her carrier language, Nechako means the great river is flowing. But she says that's changed dramatically since the government granted Alcan a water license and the company built a dam that reversed its flow. It's led to a sharp decline in salmon stock. Sturgeon, which of course are a giant fish from the dinosaur era, is now an endangered species in the river. And Rio Tinto Alcan also uses the river to power its aluminum smelter on BC's north coast and to sell hydroelectric power to the rest of the province. Now, Alcan's water diversion has created almost 2,000 jobs at its smelter, making it one of the biggest employers in northwest BC, which, of course, makes things very difficult for the two First Nations tribes. A 200-day trial over the river's fate began in Vancouver in October. in BC's Supreme Court. This week, court hearings moved to Prince George so that local elders could give testimony and listen in on the proceedings. On Monday morning, as 9 black-robed lawyers took their seats, 7 Indigenous elders in full regalia smudged the judge's bench, waved spruce boughs, and sprinkled eagle feathers on the red carpet. The elders told people in the packed courtroom that they were performing a cleansing ceremony, and it went undetested by the opposition as well. So, I might as well go through the rest of the story. So Betsy Williams, an 81-year-old elder from Syke Ooze, was the first to take the witness stand. She described her family and nation's fishing practices before the dam was built. Quote, all the time, salmon. There were salmon all the time, she said. You could just catch so much. It lasts till the next run, end quote. The court hearings continue in Prince George this week before returning to Vancouver Courthouse. Rio Tinto Alcan said it won't comment while the matter is before the courts, but communications and community manager Kevin Dobbin said the company has previously tried to resolve the matter directly with the First Nations groups and prefers to settle the case out of court. Dobbin also said Rio Tinto has always abided by all laws and requirements for using water and protecting fish. Now, this is very interesting to me. And I know most people would see a story like this and be like, oh, that's horrible, and you'll fall one way or the other depending on your stance on the environment. But I'm actually coming to this, first of all, fuck a company like Alcan, who's ruining fisheries, because it's happening all over the place. I'm an avid fisherman. I see it firsthand. This summer, the algae, when I went away on my fishing trip, was horrendous because a farm field dumped something into the river that they shouldn't have, and it's killing tons of fish and naturally occurring plants and stuff. It's fucking horrible. So fuck a company like Alcan. Our government let them get away with it, but still, I have absolutely no remorse for a company like that who are doing, nothing for the environment except ruin it in this circumstance. Now, the real question I have to ask, though, is do they have a shot? Unfortunately, I don't think so, and the reason, first of all, that I don't think so is the whole 2,000 jobs. For them to get rid of this dam, it means that they are getting rid of 2,000 jobs. And ultimately, it is a political decision. I understand it's before the Supreme Court, but legally, I don't think that the tribe, I don't know if you can actually use the word tribe. I don't know if the First Nations groups have any legs to stand on in court. Maybe they do, right? Maybe the judges agree with them. Or the judge in this case, because Supreme Court cases in Canada are heard by one judge. But I don't think they will. However, politically, one of the major promises of our Prime Minister and really of the whole Liberal government since the last time they got elected, continuing to today, has been to reconcile with Aboriginal people. He's also made a very anti-corporation sentiment since the whole SNC Lavalin case, because he's trying to separate himself from, big corporations and look like he's here for the little guy. And he's very pro-environmentalism. His whole government is pro-green and pro-environment. This seems like it would be the sort of thing that the Liberal government could actually do to make a good impression on the West, the Aboriginal peoples, and the far left. Now, like I said, the big problem is they'll lose 2,000 jobs in the area, and it is a minority government. So, no matter what the judge rules, it is possible that the federal government could step in and create new legislation that would make this dam illegal, right? They're completely allowed to do that. However, BC is controlled by the NDP and the Green Party. Mostly the NDP, though, and then the Green Party have their one seat there. And I think the Liberals have 2 or 3 seats, but it's controlled by the NDP. The NDP will not agree to get rid of 2,000 jobs in BC. The Green Party also will not agree to get rid of 2,000 jobs in BC. They won't. But they might in this case. So that gets the Liberals 3 extra votes. The problem is they need to convince the Bloc to agree with them on this. This is what minority governments are all about. This is why I said it's so exciting in a minority government, because what's going to happen? Will they make a move at all? Because I seriously think that if we were under a majority, there is a good chance that they would get involved in this case, and after it's settled in the Supreme Court of BC, and you could see even, we may anyways see a motion for the Supreme Court of Canada, but you could see actual legislation passed saying that, something to do with actually reversing the flow of water. And it would be huge, but it would be possible. Thank you all for listening through to the end. As always, I encourage you to take these discussions outside into the real world. Talk to people about it at work. Talk to people about it at school, at home, on the playground. If your kids are playing in the park and, you're waiting to see because you're a single dad or a single mom and you're waiting for some hottie with a young child to walk into the park, but it never happens, and you always end up sitting beside that old lady on the park bench. Well, this time, talk to her about what we talked about here today. It's someone to talk to who's not going to be able to judge you because, hey, you only see her every third Saturday when your kids beg to go to that specific swing set, okay? So talk to those people about it. Talk to the old lady about it. Or with me over on Twitter or Instagram. Hit me up using the contact page over at www.laughtolearnpodcast.com. As always, this podcast is completely ad-free, and all I ask is you share it with your friends and family, so please share it on social media this week. This is the week to do it. This is the big week to share it. Share this episode so everyone can hear it, or share your favorite episode so they can hear that. That'd be completely awesome if you did that. Subscribe on any podcast app or over on YouTube, and tell your friends about me each and every week. And as always, until next Tuesday, keep on laughing and keep on learning.